one and I stand on that. You and me, babe, that's black on black.
Sometimes you look at a politician or you look at Kevin McCarthy and say, that guy's pliable, he's just like a bowl of jello. Or McConnell, he'll do anything he can to stay in power. When you look at these Christian nationalists and you look at Mike Johnson, or you look at people I talked about, Woody Jenkins, Tony Perkins, the influences in his life, you have to understand something. These people are committed. They believe this shit. They believe it in their bones. And what they'll do, if you meet them, they're very polite, but they want a theocracy. Johnson has already said he doesn't believe in democracy. And they do these covenant eyes where he spies on his kid and the kid, that's what they want. They want to spy on you, and they believe it. They really do. And it is a mistake to look at them and think that they're just phony baloney, full of shit, say anything politicians. No. They're committed to this, and they think they're right. And to take them as anything else is a giant mistake. And so that's the purpose of this election. This guy was formed into being what he is, and he is an avowed anti-democratic theocrat. And if you want to know what they think, and they're all evangelicals, let me refer you to a document, I think it was from the 1870s, put out by the Catholic Church called the Syllabus of Errors, which might be the most profoundly stupid document in the last 200 years. And they believe what you will read in the Syllabus of Errors. There may not be papists, but they think democracy is a sign of weakness. They think that theocracy is the way we should go and we should be run by people. And they're very upfront about it. And the biggest mistake that you can make is think that they're full of shit, because they don't think they are. And they'll be nice to you, they'll smile, we fellowship, but these are really, really fanatical people who want to get into every aspect of your freaking life.
That was James Carville warning against the Christian nationals, including the Speaker of the House, the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. But I'm going to replace nationalism or theocracy, that it could be Islam, it could be any religion that wants you to do it, or else you're an infidel, or unless you are a sinner, or unless if you don't follow it just like this, you're going to hell. All right, joining me to have this conversation, and it's beyond what's going on in the United States, but I think it's all tied. It's all the same energy. Maybe, I don't know. Let's see what he thinks. He's been around the world, and author of many books, including They Want to Kill Americans, The Militia, the Terrorists, and the Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency. Let me welcome the one and only Malcolm Nance. Hello.
Hi, glad to be back.
Glad to see you. Welcome back. I think last time I saw you, really, you had on like a bulletproof situation in the helmet. You were over in Ukraine fighting. I was like, what in the hell is Malcolm Nance doing over there, getting ready to fight? And now you've been in the streets talking real strong pro what's happening in the Gaza Strip right now with Israel bombing them. And I'm like, hey, I need to talk with you, sir, because I feel like we're at an impasse, and I want to understand your idea, your thinking. I want to understand it.
Yeah, well, last time you saw me, I was in Ukraine, and I was out fighting, defending democracy on the eastern wall of democracy, and I served in the Ukrainian army for 10 months. And came home and to help shore up the western wall of democracy, which is against Trumpism and Donald Trump's insurgency against the United States. But now we have a completely different situation, which a lot of people, when people think of me, they just think, hey, Malcolm Nance, he's the terrorism guy, or he's the spy guy, or whatever. I spent nearly my entire career working counterterrorism in the Middle East. And counterterrorism means collecting intelligence on terrorists. As a matter of fact, my first 10 years, I worked in Lebanon with, when Israel had invaded Lebanon, the United States was there. And in my first 8 months, we had over 500 people killed by suicide bombings. Americans, Israelis, French. It was an introduction to a horrible period of terrorism. And I spent the better part of 9 years after that, on and off, trying to identify where 100 Western hostages were. Now, you guys know I'm African-American, but I speak Arabic, Levantine dialect Arabic, Syrian, Lebanese, Palestinian dialects, Arabic, and the Israeli-Palestine diaspora problem was the first major mission that I had in the U.S. intelligence community. So I know a little bit about it, but just a little, because no one can ever know everything there is to know about it.
Mm. Here's how I see it. And we see right now millions of people out in the streets. Before Hamas did that horrible thing in October, Israelis were in the streets protesting against Netanyahu, calling him a tyrant and all kinds of things. He's a corrupt, dictatorial leader. And I'm putting air quotes around that. I don't think he's very much of a leader. Then this thing happens, right? And I also see in this little tiny space, which Hill Harper reminded us is the size of Detroit, are packed 2 million human beings. And what I'm seeing is the bombing and the destruction of human life. And you tell people to leave, and then you bomb the egress. You bomb the places in which they need to get out. There's no water. You shut off the water supply, shut off the food. There are women and pregnant women and children and people and babies. And the human toll of that, Malcolm, Nance is hard to watch. And I can't look at it like collateral damage and say, oh, well, Hamas is so bad that whatever happens to them is, they shouldn't have let them lead them. I'm like, it's like living in Nino Brown's, hold on, his projects, right? If you watch New Jack City, if you were living in Nino Brown's project, you could not have any kind of say over the terrorism or having Crips and Bloods in your neighborhood, right? I look at Hamas like that. So I'm always going to lean on the side of the people.
And I sympathize with you. I spent my entire career in the Middle East. All right. I lived in the Muslim world. I spent 10 years just recently living in Abu Dhabi, Iraq, Syria, Libya. I love these guys. I speak the language. I fired the rifle at many of my guys' weddings when I was in Iraq. I sympathize with every person who's lost. However, you have to rewind this story. A lot of people want to rewind it to 1947. Okay. When there was the partition between the British colony, which was occupied by the British. By the way, people always use the phrase occupiers, and they tend to forget the people who actually occupied that area, what was known as Transjordan, where the British, after the Ottoman Empire capitulated at the end of World War I, they occupied that terrain, and they were the ones who worked with the United Nations to divide it up. One of the issues that I get is that people have either a shake and bake history, or they don't really know any history. And like you, they see the strife on the street and it upsets them. However, there are precipitating events in this story that everyone needs to know before you have that. Because many people are coming to the story almost as if they're seeing the US bombing of Afghanistan, but completely forgot or didn't notice that there was a 9/11, and that, it's like you just parachute into this story as opposed to actually knowing the entire history to this story. So let's start with the most recent precipitating event, because everything you're seeing has happened many, many, many times in the last 5 years, 10 years. Right now, there's a massacre slaughter going on in Sudan between the Sudanese, backed by Russian mercenaries, that killed 5,000 people in the week that this war started. Not one dit from most people. 600,000 Syrians were mass murdered by their own government with the help of Russia, that used chemical weapons, nerve gas, 300 times in Syria. And not one person noticed. In fact, the American left sided with people like Tulsi Gabbard against Barack Obama doing anything against Syria, when in fact the United States was going to destroy Syria's air force and air defense and change the balance of power in the Middle East, which would have been a good revenge. But, when the United States started its war against ISIS in 2014, which had carried out a very similar act, slaughtering by hand tens of thousands of people by hand, executing every Iraqi Shia they saw between Baghdad, Mosul, and all points east, establishing their own terrorist nation state. The United States applied a whole lot of air power, exactly what you're seeing in Gaza, right?
Was it right? So hold on.
Hold
though.
on.
Hold
I just
on.
want to
Okay.
make a
All right,
point, whether
okay.
it's right or not, right?
Okay.
It's a question of there are two things that are happening here people are not seeing, which for years no one saw or gave a damn about. One is every one of these precipitating events issues had a massive precipitating event. 9/11, 19 hijackers came in here, principally from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabians were radicalized, flew airplanes into a building, burned 3,000 Americans to death. No one complains about the wars that we did after that. It was
that's wrong. No, sir.
Yeah, I know there were marches.
There was a lot of Cindy Sheehan's. I remember I was on the radio at the time. So let me just back up. First of all, You're right. 19 of those were Saudi Arabians. We didn't go to Saudi Arabia. Why? Because there's a financial connection there. We didn't actually go to the place that sent the 19 people over here. We went to Iraq that had nothing to do with it and deposed a sitting leader and created a hornet's nest. In my opinion, but you're the naval expert.
We went to Afghanistan first. I went to both of them.
We went to. No one was complaining about Afghanistan. We were complaining about Iraq, Halliburton, and all this other stuff that put us in a situation that, to me, created more terrorism, more hatred for Americans it would have.
I was one of the few former military intelligence people that was fully opposed to the Iraq invasion. I saw it coming. But let me get to this one. On 6 October 2023. Hamas, the terrorist group Hamas, which was the de facto default leadership of the Gazans, not the Palestinians on the West Bank, the Palestinians in Gaza. The Gaza Strip is a piece of land that after the 1967 war, which had Palestinian refugees in it, that the Egyptian government refused to take back after the end of the 1967 war. The West Bank was an area of Palestinians the government of Jordan refused to take back and left those people in the situation that they were in. Israel didn't occupy it, although they had Israeli settlers in that area up until 2005. 2005, the Israelis gave it back to the Palestinians under the Palestinian Authority and then pulled even their dead bodies out of their cemeteries. It has been Gazans, run by Gazans, Palestinians, and Hamas ever since. There was a 2-year ceasefire from Hamas firing rockets into Israel, sending suicide bombers into Israel that started in 2021. That ceasefire lasted until the morning of October 7th, 2023. Here's what happened at 6:30 in the morning. Hamas fired 10,000 rockets into Israel with the intent of getting everyone into their bomb shelters. Then they sent a force of 1,500 men to breach the border, not in one or two places, in 40 places. Those teams had two objectives in their own written manuals. Breach the border, kill the Israeli soldiers at the checkpoints. Your mission after that is to kill every living man, woman, child, and by the way, every family dog in southern Israel, including these people. Every Muslim. They killed over 70 Bedouin Muslims because they lived on that side of the border. They slaughtered them. Every Christian, every Druze, every Buddhist, every immigrant cab driver from sub-Saharan African, and every damn Jew they saw. They didn't wait for the Israeli army. Their mission was to kill everyone, and then select teams would bring back hostages to Gaza. What was the objective of this mission?
Yeah, what was the objective?
Well, this is the point. The Israelis spent 5 years and gave up 1,000 prisoners to get one Israeli soldier back, Shalit Galit. Hamas knew the lives of hostages was going to be the only thing that they would have to bargain with. They planned for 2 years to invade Israel, slaughter everyone, fall back to Gaza, and they had spent years building tunnels strictly for the Hamas terrorists. Not one bomb shelter was ever built for the 2 million people above them.
So Hamas's strategic objective.
Let me tell you.
To your point,
Hamas's strategic objective was to get Israel to do what you're seeing they're doing today.
So if you know that, and you're not getting Hamas, you're just killing innocent people who are under siege in a country that is the size of Detroit, and they have no place to go, and you control all their resources. It's inhumane, Malcolm Nance.
Your premise is wrong in one. Hold on, your premise is wrong in the first point. Okay, the Israelis waited 21 days because the United States convinced them that Hamas's strategic plan was to get Israel to come in the same day and to ambush them piecemeal out of this tunnel system. They waited 3 weeks to go in on ground because we showed them that when we did this in Fallujah and against ISIS in Mosul and ISIS in Raqqa, all right, you had to evacuate as many civilians as possible. When we did Fallujah, it was 90% of the civilians we evacuated, and still 1,000 civilians refused to leave and were killed behind ISIS's own lines. One thing you are forgetting is that the numbers and people that are being reported as killed right now, and the numbers probably grievous, okay, were people that Hamas would not allow to leave, and most of those numbers are probably a lot lower than you think. Because you're seeing, if it's one baby.
No, because
I don't want to see anyone dead.
Right, exactly. But so what I'm saying also, you fill in there well. Hold on, Malcolm. Because at the end of the day, if you cut off people's water supply, which we need to live, you cut off their food supply, and then you tell them to leave via the south to Egypt, but then somehow, we bombed. That's not true. That we didn't.
No, they didn't. Hold on. First off, let's get some facts straight. Israel cut off the water to northern sections of Gaza, this Gaza City, North Gaza City, for 1 week. All the rest of the water throughout 80% of Gaza, especially coming from Egypt in the south, was fully functional and fully operational. Food was not cut off. What was cut off was the Egyptians, the people who will not let one Gazan cross that border. The Egyptians stopped all transport due to the war into that country. The United Nations has protocols. You just can't drive into a war zone. Hamas infrastructure, everyone who controls the gates is controlled by the Hamas terrorist group. So when the Israelis were invading in the north, which their objective is to finish the military arm of Hamas, okay, a terrorist group that killed the equivalent of 46,000 Americans, slitting their throats one by one, executing them one by one. This wasn't through acts of war. The Israelis conducted airstrikes, precision airstrikes on Hamas infrastructure, Hamas tunnels. Granted, Hamas built that infrastructure in an area the size of Detroit, knowing that the civilians would not be human shields. The civilians were human sponges. This was Hamas's plan to get everyone upset. But the military objectives of Israel, let me tell you something, the Israeli Air Force is fearsome. They could have leveled that entire city, 25 kilometers.
One would even say their intelligence is fearsome. Why didn't they notice attack was happening? But let me ask Tony. Okay. Tony in Baltimore. We got less than a minute.
Oh, we got
a question. Yeah, Tony in Maryland. Welcome quickly.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Was it Nance?
Yes, Malcolm Nance.
Malcolm Nance. Yeah. I think it's unfortunate that he's kind of come on the air with an agenda, and it would be great if he could make a point and then give you a chance to either counterpoint or make your point. That's number one. Number two, he talks about the Brits having that area. And no, the Brits and the Ottomans, they conquered that area. There were people there. It's just like saying, that there were no indigenous American Indians here because, they got conquered. So that's a talking point I hear people talking about. And the second thing is, if the Egyptians let these people into their country, I don't know, 1 million people, whatever, they don't have the type of economy and infrastructure that can absorb.
That's true.
You see what problems the United States are having
with the people coming at our borders. See, I'm only rushing you because we got 15 seconds. And let me say, between Malcolm Nance and I, he's the only one with intelligence and military experience. I'm speaking as an armchair person watching things as a human being.